Hey, it's Benji Cole, son of Al Cole from CBS Radio, welcoming you to another edition of People of Distinction, the talk that gives an in-depth view of some of the most dynamic, intelligent, and successful people on the planet. Run to our website, peopleofdistinction.org, for more info, or you can email me directly at benji@alcoleenterprises.com. And on the line with us today, we have Katherine Stevens. We'll be discussing her fantastic book, Attucks and Me, Crispus Attucks and America, 1766 to 1773. And guys, that book is available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble. But if you want to get everything that Katherine has to offer, do yourself a favor. Remember, you have to go to Amazon and Barnes & Noble to purchase this book as well as the other titles that she has in her repertoire. But going to her personal website will gather more information on each individual title and also give you more information on Katherine herself. So that's chickadeehillinc.com. chickadeehillinc.com. So one more time, that's chickadeehillinc.com. And I will say, Katherine was brought to our network, People of Distinction, today by some of the best movers in the business, Parchment Global Publishing. If you have a book that you'd like moved, move it to Parchment. You can find them at parchmentglobalpublishing.com. And guys, listen, it's such a delight to have Katherine here on the line because we're going to be taking a history lesson right now. Now, it's historical fiction, of course, so it's created and embellished for entertainment's sake. But listen, you guys have all heard of the American Revolution. You've all heard of the Boston Tea Party. I bet you also heard of the Boston Massacre. I mean, this is taking me back to maybe 5th grade history or 6th grade history, right? When we were learning about the American Revolution. And there was one name that we had learned about, right? And there was one name that came up, Crispus Attucks, the first person recognized to be killed at the Boston Massacre, which then led, of course, into the American Revolution. And I love so much that we have Katherine here on the line because really that is the full extent of what we know about Crispus Attucks, or at least for me, in my experience, that was pretty much the full extent of what we learned about when it came to him. And again, remember, this is historical fiction, so a lot of this is going to be embellished for entertainment's sake, but I love the fact that we have Katherine here on the line because she found a way to really comprise a story behind it. And we're going to learn really through her words of what happened prior to the American Revolution. Really what led up to it and the individual circumstances that really embodied and developed and was showcased around Crispus Attucks. And I absolutely love that, right? Again, I'm a historical buff. I love it. This is something that I can always get on board with. So I'm really excited that we have Katherine here on the line. She's the expert. She has such an eclectic and impressive background. So without further ado, Katherine, first and foremost, thank you so much for being a guest with us today on People of Distinction. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Listen, we're very much looking forward to this. I know we have so much to discuss, so let's jump right in. Before we get into the book itself, let's hold off slightly. Start off by telling our listening audience a little bit more about your background. What are your credentials?
Well, I was a teacher of English and history. I have a BS and an MA degree. BS instead of a BA because I was not real good in math, and so I did a lot of extra history and statistics kinds of things, so it ended up with being a BS. I was a Teacher of the Year and was a runner-up of Iowa Teacher of the Year and did lots and lots of research all the time that I could. And I interviewed several of the Holocaust survivors when I was in the classroom, wow. And I had Vietnam veterans come into the classroom. There was one really interesting time when we had the Vietnam veterans come in and talk about their experiences, and one of them mentioned that they were just sitting in their high school classroom, and within 6 weeks they were in boot camp and then off to Vietnam, and the next day the Gulf War started, and the kids were just sort of blown away by that experience at how fast they could be high school seniors, and in the next minute there would be a war started. So, so to me, war and history and all of that was always very real to me, and so teaching made it all so.
Fantastic. Guys, I told you, it's such an impressive background. Katherine, thank you so much for sharing. First and foremost, let me be the first one to tell you here on our show, I'm sure you've heard this so many times before. Teachers never get enough credit for the amount of work that they have to do. The work that you've done shaping young minds and really helping mold our next generation is absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for everything that you've been able to do.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Now, Katherine, in addition to Attucks and Me, what else have you published?
The first thing I published was a collection of poetry, Destined by Stars. I had a collection that I put together of poems that I published in Lyrical Iowa by the Iowa Poetry Association. And so I just put those together in a book and published those. And then the other book just came out in this year. It's called Otto. And again, it's a book of historical fiction. And this one's about a young German soldier that follows him through World War I right up to the Nuremberg trials.
Wonderful. I'm recognizing a pattern here. We have Attucks and Me, historical fiction. We have your newest book, Otto, historical fiction. I mean, aside from Destined by Stars, which of course is a collection of poetry, this historical fiction genre seems to be something that's right up your alley. Talk to our listening audience. Why do you write historical fiction? I
think because history is not dates and facts, and so often when we have to, like when I was teaching U.S. history, they teach it in, like you had said something about fifth grade. So in fifth grade, you teach the founding of America, perhaps up through the Civil War. And then in high school, you pick up at the Civil War and you teach to modern times. Well, hopefully you were in school all the time in fifth grade and weren't sick, so that you actually got the early part of U.S. history. So we have to, as teachers, we have to trug through all that information and hope that the children understand what America is all about. And that is not history. History is the story, literally the story of what happened. And so in my writing, what I want to tell is the story behind the dates, the story behind the wars, the story behind what makes us who we are. And that's what I try to do in my writing. And yes, everything I write is fiction, but the history is true. The dates are true. The people are based on true people who really lived. I chose Crispus Attucks because he's a person that people know something about. They know that he was a Black American, but do they know that he was buried in a grave with white people? The first time that had ever happened anywhere, and thanks to good old Sam Adams, that happened. And I always get cold chills when I think about that, and what a difference that made. My little white Quaker boy, who becomes almost a son to Crispus Attucks, loves him like a father. And to me, history is what real people do, and why they do it. And it is the motivation of why people do what they do. At the Boston Massacre, for example, how many people know that the soldiers at the Boston Massacre that fired on the crowd had just come back from Ireland, where in Ireland they shot without even thinking twice. If you were running down the street as an Irishman, they might shoot at you or they might kill you, and they might not think twice about it because you were probably running to get into trouble or running from trouble that you had just been in. That's the kind of war that was going on in Ireland at that time. Wow. And so those same soldiers came here to America, and they were totally out of control. They were given full reign during the day. They weren't kept in barracks or anything. And because they were given full reign during the day, they were looking for jobs. And they were vying for Americans for jobs. And there weren't any. And there were fights over jobs. And so they were ready at the time of the Boston Massacre. And it was the same people they fought with over jobs who were there at the Boston Massacre. It was just, that is the kind of story that's there And you don't have to make it up. It doesn't have to be fiction because it's true.
Katherine, let's jump right in. Tucks and Me, Crispus Attucks and America, 1766 to 1773. Tell us a little bit more about your book.
Well, it's a story of a young Quaker boy. And the Quakers, for the most part, years ago, had been removed from Massachusetts, so there weren't very many left. Now, young Gabriel his whole family had really gotten rheumatic fever. And he survived, but he was still quite sickly. And so they all thought that since they weren't too far from the docks and they knew it's a safe place to be, they thought that if he were down by the docks in a safe place, that the salt air and the sunshine would help him get well. So his dad built out of old tea crates and some boards sort of make-believe ship. And so Gabe would go down to the docks in the afternoon and just lay out in the sun on the top of what was his make-believe ship that he called the Intrepid. One day, Crispus Attucks comes back from one of his sailing voyages on a merchant ship, and he comes back to the place where he always hangs out to discover this ship here and this young Quaker boy. And at first he's very angry, and then as he sees how ill that the Quaker boy is, he decides, well, he can share his special place with this sick boy, and they develop this wonderful friendship. And as they develop this friendship and they tell stories back and forth, the reader is going to learn about what the Stamp Act did to the average person. Of course, you'll learn about the Boston Massacre. You'll also learn about the riots that go on and between both the black and the white laborers, because there were a lot of free blacks at that time in Massachusetts as well as slaves. And you'll find out what it was like to be a seaman, an ordinary seaman or an able seaman, and what the early Quakers, the role that they played in abolishing slavery, and this wonderful friendship that develops. And at some point, you'll learn about Crispus Attucks' family, and his mother was a Native American, and his father was a slave. And you'll hear his father tell the story of what it was like to come over on what they call the Middle Passage and a slave ship, and all about those kinds of things during that time of period and how people worked together when they were in poverty, and what it was like when the Boston Harbor was closed down and barricaded with British ships out blocking the harbor. It's all about the average person and what it was like to be alive then.
Guys, again, here on the line with Katherine Stevens, we're discussing her fantastic book, Tucks and Me, Crispus Attucks in America, 1766 to 1773. Available for purchase on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, but also make sure to go directly to her website to check out this book as well as other titles that she has created called ChickadeeHillInc.com. You know, Katherine, this is fantastic. Next question that I'd love to go into is actually going to be a multi-part question, okay? So it's pretty extensive, but I'd love to take a step away from your books now and talk about your writing process. So first and foremost, tell us about your writing process, and B, specifically, how do you write?
Well, something usually I would say, hits me over the head and makes me think that I have to do more. I suppose it's a teacher in me. In the case of Tucks and Me, I was teaching a poetry unit, and we were doing the Ride of Paul Revere. And the students in my class, some of them did not believe that there'd ever been an American Revolution. Remember what I said? Please be sure that you were in class when you were in fifth grade.
Absolutely.
Well, they had missed fifth grade, and they didn't know that there'd ever been an American Revolution. And so I had a whole lot of teaching to do, and that was what gave me the impetus for writing this book about Crispus Attucks. Mm-hmm. And a lot of my students were African American, and I thought, they need to know about Crispus Attucks. the bravery of the man, the willingness to stand up, to the soldiers there and pull the gun out of the soldier's hand, and it eventually got him killed. But the bravery to do that, the heroic act of that, and it just seemed to me that when you have that kind of a catalyst, then you need to start, then how do you set that up? And then you've got the years of research. I think by the time I was through, it was probably about 4 years of research before I was willing to do that. So then once I have all that background in my head, I haven't started any writing really except that. Then I've got a main character. I've got somebody in my head, and it's got to be someone who can play off of Crispus Attucks, and somebody who's going to survive to the end of the book and go beyond. And then there has to be like a redemption kind of action at the end, somehow to redeem the world for the death of Crispus Attucks, if you will. And what better than a young boy who will grow into a man by the end of the book. And so then I have my main character, and then, really it's like what the Greeks used to say about a muse. Once you start writing, the other characters just magically appear. It's like the book, I know this sounds silly, but it's like the book writes itself.
Absolutely.
People that you didn't even know were around come in. Now, in Attucks and Me, I had some excellent help because you've got Sam Adams, and James Otis, and you've got John Adams, who did the trial of the people, the soldiers and their officers involved in the massacre itself. And then you've got the Governor Hutchinson and that sort of thing. So you've got historical figures that, of course, are going to figure in the book. But then you've got who else in the book? Oh, how about the sailor that Crispus Attucks moves in next door to when he built his cabin, and they're a little afraid because here's this big black man moving in, building a house near them, just down the hill from them, and then when the blockade comes, how does this family make money? Well, they make money. She makes money by washing clothes, and so when her husband is off, then how does she get wood? And it's a really bad winter, and so Crispus Attucks, cuts wood for them. And it's just all these little things just sort of magically happen that you don't plan out when you start writing the book. And it just kind of drifts along. You need to talk about the rope making process, because it was a fight at the rope making places where the soldiers and the sailors got into a fight once the harbor was blockaded. And so then you have to talk about those. And then once you do a little bit more research, you find out that Killdeer was one of the same Killdeer that you saw all during the wars. They put the signs up that said Killdeer was here. Well, Killdeer was a British soldier who got into the fights at the rope making place, and he was also that soldier at the Boston Massacre who had been in Ireland and was ready to shoot anyone because he saw in front of him the same men that he'd fought with on the rope walk. And so, it's like all this stuff just comes to you, and it just magically happens. And like the Greeks, they would say that you have a writing muse that leads you on the way. But if you have it all there in front of you, the pages just kind of come. Of course, the editing is another story, but getting the story down, that comes.
Absolutely. Katherine, so many great points that you brought up. And listen, as we stated before, this is historical fiction, right? So it's all things taken from history. So there's a great education to be received, as well as entertainment value as well. Now, fast forwarding it to today, in your opinion, does your book have meaning and apply to today?
Yeah, I've been thinking about that since we talked earlier. At first I was thinking, the meaning is that Gabe and Tux formed a friendship, regardless of age or religion or color. But I'm thinking more now about the riots. The early rioting and rebellions that Sam Adams instigated in the beginning. They were just supposed to be like what we would call today some of the protest riots. Some of the like the Black Lives Matter kind of riots, where a few people got out of hand and they burned some trash cans and maybe they wrecked a few storefronts and that sort of thing. And then what happened is their riots were led by a man named Mackenzie, and he really took it out of hand. And he took the rioters into, or by this time they were really mobs. He took them into Governor Hutchison's mansion, and they went inside and they tore it completely apart. We're talking knocking down walls, wrecking all the furniture. They destroyed some of his papers. He had been writing a book, and they destroyed all of his research and his books and everything. They even went into his garden, his beautiful flower garden and his vegetable garden, and tore up plants and everything. And it was at that time that Sam Adams just disowned him totally. And that set the stage for an end to that kind of rioting. That was like what we might say a bridge too far for Sam Adams. And so when they needed to do something at the end, and Gabe and his brother wanted, after the Boston Massacre, and they needed to do something to break the British blockade when the tea ships came in, it was easy for Sam Adams to agree to the boys saying, let's do something nonviolent, because to destroy, ships and things, there's nothing to be gained there. There's nothing to be gained by destroying property. So they just dumped the tea in the harbor, but nothing else on the ships was damaged. No people were damaged. No other property was damaged. The ships themselves were not damaged. They only dumped the tea in the harbor, and they only did that after they did every other legal thing they could possibly do, and that's all outlined in the book.
Fantastic.
So I think today maybe we've learned with the Capitol, with the attack on the Capitol, maybe we've learned that the whole concept of rioting and marches maybe have gone just a step too far, and we need to stand back and not quit protesting, but be careful about how we organize our protests.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing. Katherine, last question as we tie up this fantastic interview. And again, we've covered so much information today. Thank you very much for everything you've been able to relay. Now, we know about your book. We know about a number of books that you have in the repertoire. So I would be remiss if I didn't ask this question. In your opinion, Katherine, what do you believe makes good writing?
I think good writing is something that tells the truth. Whether you're writing historical fiction or poetry or romance fiction or whatever, a good book can be in any kind of a genre. It really can be. And there's, I read all kinds of books, and it's something that is true. Whether it's, even science fiction, you can tell whether a book is true, whether characters act the way people or animals or creatures from another world, if they act in a true manner, if they act in character. Is it true? Does it have something to say to the world? Can it make the world a better place? Can it make somebody understand themselves better? Can it help somebody understand the world, the animals, the creatures, the environment, the sun, whatever? Can it make us understand better so that we can react in a more, I guess I would say civilized, if I were speaking in my own terms, I would say Christian way, but I don't want to say that and offend anybody, but in a more loving way towards each other, in a more accepting way towards each other. Anything that can help us understand other cultures, other beings, other places. Good writing should make us better people when we have finished the book than we were before we started the book. I would say that.
Wonderfully articulated. Guys, what more can be said? You know what you gotta do. Head on over to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, go directly to her personal website, chickadeehillinc.com, and learn more about each and every one of these titles, and then go back to Amazon, Barnes & Noble so you can purchase each one of them. Attucks and Me, Crispus Attucks in America, 1766 to 1773. While you're going through all of this, as she stated, what can be learned? What can be gained? How can this be applied? How can the message be applied to our lives? Let's grow. Let's develop. Katherine, this has been an absolute blessing. Thank you so much for being a guest with us today on People of Distinction.
Thank you so much. And you were a really good interviewer. Thank you.